Welcome everyone to episode 39 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. How cool was that intro? That was actually sent in to us by a podcast listener, Ted Williams. We really appreciate all your hard work, Ted. Me and Andrew absolutely love it, 100%. Now this is episode 39 as mentioned, and this will actually be our last episode of 2023. Now today Andrew is actually enjoying some much needed rest, so you're stuck with me, Jesse, as your host for this episode. Now we've been recording this weekly podcast since February 2023, and we have thousands and thousands of downloads, and we'd like to take this time to thank you for your support in helping us to grow into one of Ontario's top fishing podcasts, believe it or not. We're really excited for season 2 starting in January, and we're going to actually start having regular guests, which is going to be awesome. Now, with 38 episodes recorded over this year, I thought this episode we could do a compilation of some of our favorite interesting fishing facts and segments that made us laugh, so hopefully they'll make you laugh again too. So please enjoy this episode, sit back and relax. Unless you're driving, then pay attention. Here's our first one.
So One name is Kempenfelt Kelly, is what this creature is nicknamed.
Is that from Simcoe?
Yes, it's from Lake Simcoe.
Yeah.
So its other names are Beaverton Bessie. Yeah. Yay, my hometown.
Andrew's a hillbilly, if you didn't know.
Or the Loch Simcoe Monster.
That doesn't really roll off the tongue. Whoever invented that, you need to get better imagination.
So I'm going to call it Beaverton Bessie just because...
I like that.
That's good.
It sounds like someone that, some frumpy woman that lives in Beaverton.
Oh, you mean half the population? I can say that because I was from there.
I was going to say, no, if you live in Beaverton, no offense, but, go for a walk.
Great town to grow up in and just go fishing because there was nothing else to do.
Except for invent mythical creatures.
So Beaverton Bessie has been described as being between 20 and 30 feet long, scaly, has multiple dorsal fins, dark color, and a blunt head, similar to the Loch Ness. So the Huron First Nation people, they used to call it I believe it's Igopogo.
Igopogo?
Yeah. Oh. Or something similar. I'm probably butchering that name. I apologize.
I like that better than Beaverton Bessie.
No, Beaverton Bessie's the best.
Okay. I think Beaverton Bessie was Andrew's first girlfriend or something.
So imagine you're fishing Lake Simcoe and all of a sudden this 30-foot serpentine monster comes up with a blunt head.
And this is the noise it would make.
What would you do? This is it was described as a friendly character, but I
would cast my bait directly towards it. Bring it on. I got 50-pound braid on. No, I'm on Simcoe. There's no way I'm using 50-pound braid.
What if you're perch fishing and all of a sudden you're looking down the ice fishing hole and it's it goes dark. Is that a school of herring? And then just a giant eye comes along. You're like, ah. So, anyways, I like that one because I'd never heard of that the whole time I was living on Lake Simcoe, but I should have been keeping my eye out for it.
Was it possibly invented by a bunch of drunk people?
It's been around. There have been sightings for it for a long time. This was actually one of my favorite episodes. It was released April 23rd, 2023. It was entitled Unbelievable Ontario Fishing Lore, and Andrew discussed legends of spooky creatures that swim in the waters of Ontario that you possibly may encounter. In this episode too, the interesting fishing fact was me talking about the history of Len Thompson spoon. So definitely an interesting episode. We really enjoyed doing this one. The next clip here is actually from episode 12, which was called Early Season Muskie Fishing. And me and Andrew talk about techniques that work really good in Ontario for catching fish early season, June and July. And right in this clip, we talk about one of probably the best musky lures that you can ever own in Ontario. These Mepps musky killers, almost everyone will tell you, just chuck one of these, you'll catch fish, especially when you're looking to get bites. You may not catch the biggest muskie ever on these. You can, but you will get lots of bites on them. And at the same time, when I've been using these, I've caught really big pike, I've caught bass, no problem. It's just a big spinner. Yeah. And that's, again, it's a snack. Other popular spinners is the Booker tails. Yeah.
These are classics. This is the 500. This is the 700. They're just, one's a 500 size blade. It's just the same size as basically a Mepps musky killer. Yep. And the 700 just has a size 7 blade. So it's a single 7. And they're not that big. You can cast these on heavy bass tackle for the 500
Yep.
anyway. And they're easy to retrieve. These little small spinners may not be considered a bucktail, but we're talking about just inline spinners generally.
Yeah.
But the smaller ones, I'd say throughout June and even into July, they're really effective. And you can actually reel them in pretty fast in the summer too. I actually caught, I was fishing for muskie last year, and on this Buchertail 700, I actually caught a pretty big channel catfish on it when I was muskie fishing. And I thought I had a big muskie on, and I was fighting this thing, and it came up beside the canoe, and it was a big channel cat. And I was like, oh, I was kind of disappointed, but at the same time,
I was gonna say,
super freaked out. I was like, this is awesome. This next clip we released May 28th, 2023. This was the episode called Fishing Pet Peeves. And you would not believe the crazy responses we got on Instagram when we posted videos from our video podcast about these different pet peeves. Everything from littering to jet skis to walleye versus pickerel. And especially the walleye versus pickerel one, which you'll listen to right now. You would not believe the insane and crazy messages we got from people on social media. You're wrong if you call them pickerel. You're allowed to call them whatever you want. You can call them
my grandpa always called them pickerel. You know what? I'm not going to argue with my grandpa.
No, I'm not going to argue, but it's a slang for a walleye. It's called walleye. So when people correct me and say, actually, it's pickerel, it literally
actually
it's
walleye.
It's literally not. So you're wrong. And I will challenge you any day if you say it's pickerel, because it's literally not.
So there's, Jesse's exactly right. There are two different species, completely different families of fish. Yeah. So a walleye, very similar to a sauger. Similar to a sauger. The crossbreed is a sawguy. So those are similar fish. A pickerel is in the Essex family, Esox family.
It's related to pike.
So if you Google chain pickerel is one of them. So on the east coast in Canada, in the northeast states, chain pickerel are all throughout that water system, and they look almost identical to pike. They're very hard to differentiate between a pike and a pickerel. Mm-hmm. That is what a pickerel is. So if you are talking to anyone who has both of those fish in the area or in their province, and you ask them, what are you fishing for? And they say pickerel, you know they're talking about chain pickerel. If you're fishing for walleye, they will say walleye. They have to differentiate them because they have the same species. Here in Ontario, we don't have the chain pickerel. So for many, it just became, like you said, like slang, and they didn't feel the need to differentiate it because there's no confusion over here.
Yeah. So really, it's walleye, guys. Come on. This next clip is actually one of my favorite interesting fishing facts that Andrew ever did. This episode came out June 4th. It was called Swim Jig Fishing 101, and it was actually one of our most downloaded episodes of the year. And in this episode, we obviously talked a lot about, fishing swim jigs and different sizes, colors, and places to fish them. But the funny thing about this episode was Andrew's interesting fishing fact where he elaborated on some pretty sketchy tournament cheaters of the past. So check out this one.
But I was thinking of what are some other kind of more interesting ways that people have cheated in the past?
Okay.
Specifically in bass tournaments.
Interesting.
So I'm not sure if you ever heard of these before. So I have three different ones. The first one, which I had seen a short video on, which is kind of why I picked this topic. Elro McNeil in 1983. So this
sounds like a cheater.
Oh, he was. So this was down in Texas. It took place back in 83. At this time, when it first started, the bass tournaments, you would actually kill the bass. Like they would have them dead. It was completely fine, normal. So what he did was he bought a frozen bass from Florida. Then he thawed it in his bathtub in Louisiana. Then took it to the Tyler, Texas fishing tournament, and he gave it to a competitor or someone who was actually angling in the event, and they split the livings. They split the winnings.
Oh, the winnings.
So this he did this a couple times. He eventually upgraded his truck to have an aerator in it and would transport live bass to these different tournaments for a total of $350,000 of winnings.
And that's back in the 80s.
This is 83,
Holy
I believe,
smokes.
to 85. So in 85, him and three other anglers received fines and 5-year prison sentences.
That's crazy.
Like, that's nuts.
Wow. You got some balls to do that.
My goodness.
Especially to unthaw fish, because like you've all caught it.
So
got a fish at the grocery store unthawed. It doesn't look fresh at all.
You know why they caught him? Why there's a lot of suspicion?
Why?
Is because a guy apparently, now this is hearsay, I couldn't find any actual reports on it, but apparently a guy won a tournament but didn't have any tackle in his boat. It's like, well,
that makes sense.
That's interesting. Another one is, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, it's Guernsey's 2012 Balwick Bass Club Tournament. This is actually in England. It's an English bass tournament. The winning bass of the tournament was 13 pounds and 13 ounces. It's a big bass.
That's a big bass.
It beats second place by 3 pounds, which is still like a 10-pound bass is a really big bass still. So Matthew Clark, he was the first place winner with that 13-pound bass, and he was posing for the photo after the tournament with his second place winner, Shane Bentley. When Bentley recognized that bass as a specific bass, he had recently been to the St. Peter Port Aquarium and saw that the same distinct markings on the head of that winning bass as he saw on the bass in the aquarium. So the next day he went, inspected the aquarium, couldn't find the fish. He had the staff look, they couldn't find the fish. And eventually Clark confessed to it. He had scaled a cliff, climbed a rope ladder, broke into this aquarium because he had previously worked there, so he knew how to get in. And he took this bass, he took it live. I don't know how he transported this thing down a cliff live. Brought it to the tournament, won, and then he went to return it, but he dropped it and injured it. So he gave it to a fish seller, or sold it to a fish seller, and they just chopped it up. So
the guy does a full-out Mission Impossible Tom Cruise into a tank to legit get a bass.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, that guy.
Imagine
that's impressive.
He's like, hey, you're pre-fishing for a tournament? Yeah, I'm going to the Bass Pro Shops tank.
Yeah. This next clip I got from episode 15 called Top Bass Lures of Ontario. This came out June 11th, 2023. In this episode, we talk about a lot of different baits for catching largemouth and smallmouth bass in Ontario. It's actually one of our top downloaded episodes, and we talk about chatterbaits, topwaters, wacky worms, all kinds of stuff. Really liked it. The cool thing I liked about this episode especially was the interesting fishing fact that where we describe how polarized sunglasses actually work and why you really need them. And I really like this because it really shows what the interesting fishing fact segment is all about. It's about learning new things. I tried to think of something that I personally didn't know. I was like, okay, like what is something that, you know, you use all the time, but you may not understand exactly how it works or why it works. So I was thinking, I was like, what are polarized sunglasses? Like, what are they? Okay. Interesting, right? So like, you may have, you know, used regular sunglasses that you bought that aren't polarized and tried to look into the water and you're like, these are crap. And then you put on a pair of polarized sunglasses and you can literally see through the water and you're like, what kind of voodoo is this? Like why does it work? Okay. So I didn't know. I just always took it for granted. So I did some research. This is not a very long, interesting fishing fact, but it's short but sweet. So, polarized glasses reduce light glare. Now, you may say, obviously, that's why they work. And they will 100% improve your fishing game, 100%. So, here's what happened. Back in 1936, some old guy named Edwin H. Land, who worked for Polaroid, he created the first polarized glasses, and they have been a staple in the eyewear industry ever since. Now, this is interesting because I remember when I grew up fishing, polarized sunglasses, they're kind of hard to get. Like you could get even the cheap, bulky Rapala ones for like $30-$40.
You could only get ones that fit over other glasses.
Yeah. Now you go to the store and they're reasonably priced. You can get cheap ones, you can get expensive ones, but like they're everywhere.
And you look at even the name brands, like you look at Oakley or Ray-Ban, you're getting a pair of sunglasses, regular sunglasses from them. Generally, they are polarized as well.
Yeah.
Like it's become standardized almost.
Exactly. So like it is good that you can get, you know, if you're getting into fishing and you're like, wow, these benefits sound good, you can probably spend $20 or $30 and get a pair to get you started. But anyway.
I still buy those.
Yeah, I buy those too because I break mine all the time.
Scratch them up.
Yeah. So anyway, that started in 1936. And polarized lenses, this is how they work. This is interesting. It has a special chemical that is applied to the lens that filters the light. Now it's like, okay, that's interesting. Obviously it filters the light somehow, but it's a chemical. What does this chemical do? Well, when light scatters as it bounces off a surface, it creates a glare. And I actually looked up the definition of glare and it said, a strong dazzling light. Kind of like a disco ball. But the chemicals, what happens is the chemical's molecules, they line up specifically to block some of the light passing through the lenses. Now, not
so there's only certain directions then, essentially.
Yes, exactly. So on polarized lenses, the filter created by this chemical, it creates vertical openings of light. Now, how the heck they do that, I have no idea. But it creates vertical openings of light and blocks horizontal light waves bouncing off smooth surfaces of water.
That makes sense as to why, because I wondered why when I wear them, especially
you
like
turn
driving,
your head.
Yeah, you turn your head and you're seeing like the weird like stripes or dots on windshields disappear and come back.
Yeah, right?
All right.
So isn't that
we look
interesting?
like absolute idiots? Like
I'm going to repeat that for emphasis. The filter created by this chemical creates vertical openings of light that blocks horizontal light waves. That's very interesting. So as a result, you can see clearer and deeper into the water that actually has glare on it, because they use the example of a blind. Say it's bright outside. You pull the blind down and it blocks some of the light from coming in. Mm-hmm. It won't block all of it, but it blocks some of it. But this chemical creates, it only allows certain light in at certain directions, which is very interesting. So when you're wearing sunglasses, you may have noticed this. You may have noticed that when you're wearing polarized sunglasses, you may have trouble seeing LCD screens, cell phones, watch screens, ATM displays, stuff like that. And I've noticed that too. Like sometimes I'll be wearing my polarizers and I'm trying to take a picture of my phone. You have to take your sunglasses
especially
off.
If you're trying to take a horizontal photo on your phone and it doesn't work. Yeah.
So definitely, if you have that, don't worry. Nothing's wrong with your sunglasses. That's the way it works.
Squidward, I've gone blind.
So the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, though. You're like, oh man, I can't believe I can see all these fish, but I can't see my my watch screen. Like, who cares, guys?
Doesn't matter what time it is. Keep casting.
Exactly. So it definitely outweighs all the disadvantages, though. And again, there's less strain on your eyes. So especially, you should always be wearing sunglasses when you're out on the water when it's sunny. But when you have polarized glasses, it not only helps your eye strain, but it helps you actually see into the water. And now if you fish shallow water structure, that can be a big deal, or trout creeks. And a quick example of this is, I remember when I was young, I was like 13, 14, I bought a pair of polarized sunglasses. Remember those
the
big
old Berkeley ones?
Rapala,
Rapala.
remember? Yeah. They look terrible. Now they're a lot more stylish, but they look terrible. And my dad took me to this trout stream that we used to fish a lot, and he was like fishing this pool, and I looked at the pool and I was like, there's no fish here. And he's like, oh yeah, they're in there, yeah. And I'm like, put these sunglasses on. He looks and he sees straight to the bottom. There's no fish. And he's like, wow, these are amazing. So it's definitely something that you need. So that is the very brief and interesting interesting fishing fact. So what do you think about that?
I like it. It was good. It was good. It was informative, interesting.
Okay.
And it put me, I felt like I was back in school. I admit at the beginning I was a little like, this is going to be boring.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
It wasn't, no. Like, and in the end, it turned into like that class. Be like, yeah, science rules.
So this next clip was actually from episode 16, which was called Chattering About Chatterbait Fishing, and it was released June 18th, 2023. This was one of my favorite episodes to record because if you followed our page for any amount of time, you will know that me and Andrew absolutely 100% love fishing chatterbaits, not even just for bass, but also for muskie, for pike, even for walleye. This was an in-depth episode where we shared everything that we've known and learned about chatterbait fishing. It was fantastic. The cool thing about this episode, though, is Andrew peered into the Freshwater Fisherman's Bible by Vlad Evanoff, which is a 60-year-old book he found at Value Village. What he did in this episode is he compared some of the old school writings in this book of how people caught bass and equipment and compared it to this day. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. The way that things have changed is crazy, especially speaking to our grandparents or even our parents. It is funny how things have changed over the years, but this old book made it pretty interesting to see the big differences.
With it being bass opener when this gets released, I figured chapter 3 of this book is all about largemouth bass. So some people, they might have had some smallmouth in the early season in some areas in Ontario, but largemouth, this is when you wait for bass opener.
Yep.
So we'll take a gander at some of what Vlad Evanoff has told us and written down about largemouth bass.
And if you haven't tuned into this podcast before, this book was written in 1964.
64, something like that. I always forget the year. I'll look it up right now. It is 64. I should never doubt you, Jesse.
I'm a genius. Continue.
So the largemouth bass, as he attributes it, is an especially popular species with the expert and dedicated anglers who seek a challenge, and a fish which is not too easily fooled. So it says they are... Oh, this is an interesting terminology. Largemouth bass are almost always hungry, curious, and pugnacious.
I'm going to pretend I know what pugnacious means.
I didn't even look it up. I'm like, it's probably stupid.
Yeah.
Largemouth, it says, are largemouthed black bass, as he calls them.
Yep.
Oh. So they will fill their stomachs to capacity with large fish, frogs, mice, small birds, snakes, and young muskrats, and still hit a lure or bait. That's true.
It's true. I actually did catch one time a big 6-pound largemouth, and it had a full bullhead catfish tail sticking out of its throat, and it still hit the bait. And we could feel its stomach. The catfish was at least 8 or 9 inches long.
For sure. I've caught someone spitting up some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So some other names for the largemouth bass. Says it's also called the big-mouthed bass, green bass, green trout,
No.
lake bass, that's all bass, mossback, and line sides.
Yeah, I can see that.
Line sides is like, it's so far out, but like, it makes sense, yes. But it's like, hey, catch any good line sides today? But like, what are you talking about, you old freak?
Yeah. Well, mossy back. Remember,
mossback, yeah.
G. Loomis used to have a mossy back line of rods. They were bass rods. So, yeah.
So he also talks about the using different types of rods. So some anglers will use cane poles or glass poles, but the casting rod is much more sport and better.
Oh.
Now,
I agree with that.
He claimed, I thought this was false at first, because again, this is 64. He claimed that the casting rod and reel has been used for black bass for more than 100 years. And I was like, no, that's ridiculous. So I did a bit of research, and apparently bait casters have been around from the 17th century. So wow. I'm like, okay, maybe yes.
How dare you doubt Vlad?
I'm sorry, Vlad. His preferred action, if in the southern states where the bass get very large, is a medium action bait casting rod from 5 to 6 feet long and a good level winding bait cast reel. I think the pros disagree nowadays.
Yeah, but I guarantee that was
technology
a pistol
has
grip.
Changed.
That was a pistol grip for sure.
It's like, it's great for skipping under docks.
Yeah, that's about it.
So it talks about two different lures. So again, it just shows like how times have changed with how lures are called, what we call them, or what are still around even.
Yeah.
So he talks about lures for bass. There are thousands of plugs, spoons, spinners, jigs, plastic and rubber worms, eels, and other imitations. Pork chunk, pork rind, bass bugs, and flies. Popper, swimmer, gurgler, or wounded minnow. Talks about other things that largemouth bass will eat. You can use as live bait, apparently, for them. Is suckers, small bullheads, gizzard shad, small carp, goldfish, chubs, shiners, yellow perch, lamprey eels, and killifish can all be used where legal. It's like, none of those are legal.
This next clip came from the episode that we published on June 25th. Called Average Loons Answer Fishing Questions. This was actually a Q&A where we answered questions from our listeners, but the first part that we did was an interesting fishing fact, which was my first interesting fishing fact about loons. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, I've actually tried to get away with doing multiple interesting fishing facts about loons, and they have been greatly, greatly popular. So popular, in fact, that we actually changed our logo to have a loon in it. So sit back and relax and listen to the first OG interesting fishing fact about loons. Loons are one of my favorite birds.
100%.
In fact, all of my favorite birds are fishermen or anglers. I guess they're not anglers because they don't use rod and reel, but they're all fishers.
I like this topic because I haven't even told you this story. When I was fishing out Sunday, I have a loon story, but I want to hear your interesting fishing fact first.
Okay. So if you didn't know, if you maybe just moved to Ontario and have never seen a loon, I'm going to describe one for you.
Look at the $1 coin.
Yeah. First of all, look at a loonie. It's called a loonie.
Or the old $20 bill.
If you're old enough to have one of the old $20 bills with a loon on it, again, how's your back today? But anyway, loons are a swimming and diving bird found all throughout Ontario. This is what they look like. They are black and white checkered bodies, which is beautiful, piercing red eyes, and spear-like beaks. And they hunt fish, just like us. But I say the most distinctive thing about loons is their eerie and haunting call, oftentimes that you hear at night. That was a loon noise.
I definitely made that with my mouth.
Yeah, 100%. So I always think this, and quick story. Me and my wife went interior last year for her first time.
Camping.
Yeah. Yep. And there was a crazy loon on the lake, and it was just all night long, just making that, that crazy, eerie call. And I was thinking, don't loons sleep? Have you ever thought that? Like, they're awake all night. Like, what are they doing out there? Okay. So I looked it up. Do loons sleep? Apparently, they don't sleep a lot at night, and this is why. Loons take several naps throughout the day.
Oh.
And scientists, or I guess animal researchers, I got called out for saying science when it was actually biology a few episodes ago, so I don't know what it is.
Isn't biology a form of science? Like, it's a subgenre of science?
Exactly. Haters are going to hate. But anyway, people that study loons will tell you that loons take several short naps, averaging 14 minutes, not 15, 14 minutes throughout the day. And at night, they sleep for up to an hour at a time, but that's it.
I'm going to now say I'm going to go take a loon nap.
Yeah. Going to take a loon, just like, here's the problem though. When I take a nap, it's not going to be 14 minutes. I'm going to wake up
14 hours later. Yeah. like, what time zone is this?
So anyway, that's why you hear them at night a lot, and it may be annoying and sometimes creepy, especially when you're like interior camping and it's like dead quiet and you just hear this thing that sounds like someone's getting murdered.
That's not a loon. That was like some weird owl.
So now you may wonder, why are loons called loons? And this is funny. And one of the definitions was like, oh, a loon is called a loon because loon means diving bird, blah, blah, blah. Boring. Okay.
Okay.
This is the actual answer. And I'm going to say it's the actual answer because it's the interesting answer. And it's not made up by some random person, like somebody's grandpa. This is according to National Geographic. So it's...
Who did the interview? Like my grandpa.
Yeah. Some grandpa. Why are loons called loons? And this is actually funny. It's because of how clumsy they are when they walk on land. So apparently, their legs are so far back. They're located so far to the rear of their bodies. Their center of gravity is like way off. And it makes it very difficult for them to actually walk on land.
That makes sense.
Have you ever seen a loon on land? I never have. And you know why? Because they literally can't walk on their feet. Like, they're clumsy. They fall. Their center of gravity, their chest is so heavy.
Kind of like some ducks, like mallard ducks, when they're actually walking. Yeah, their chests are very high because they have to like tilt way back. Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
So that's interesting.
I want to see a loon on land now.
Yeah. So the position of their feet makes it terrible for them to walk on land. But on the other point, it makes them amazing swimmers. And if you've ever seen a loon swim in the water, it is crazy. And they can swim pretty fast. Apparently they've been clocked up to 20 miles an hour.
Underwater.
That's nice. Now, I didn't look up what kilometers that is, but that's what?
You're probably looking at 36 kilometers?
Sure. That's faster than I can run.
Like yeah.
I can't run that fast. But anyway, that seems pretty fast for a loon, but hey, that's what National Geographic said. Another cool fact about loons is they can actually stay underwater for up to 10 minutes. That's crazy. I always think, I can hold my breath, and after literally 30 seconds, I'm like, ah!
Not like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible 5. Like,
yeah, and when a loon comes up, you don't just hear it gasping for this. Like, he just comes up and then casually breathes like it was nothing.
Glares at you on your boat and is like, you're in my territory, and dives again.
Exactly. So what helps loons be such good divers? Because they obviously dive not just for fun. They're not Michael Phelps. They dive because they're hunting fish. Just like us.
Just like Michael Phelps.
Yeah. So loons, much like Michael Phelps, are heavy. I'm assuming he's heavy. That guy's a monster.
He's ripped, yeah.
Yeah. They're heavy. They weigh up to 17 pounds. Now,
Michael Phelps is built like a loon.
Yeah. He's a bit of a loon. No offense. They have solid bones. So most birds, I don't know a lot about birds because I like fish, but most birds have hollow bones, which makes them lightweight so they can fly.
I thought that was a criteria to be a bird, honestly, because
loons have solid bones, which helps them be less buoyant and better at diving.
So I'm assuming...
And they can still fly, though, too. With solid bones, they can still fly.
And they can fly long distances. And there is a whole bunch of information about how far they can fly and all that kind of stuff, but that may be another time. But that's one of the reasons they can dive so deep. And apparently they can dive up to 200 feet. 200 feet. So literally, like in Ontario, almost all the lakes around us that we fish, we have been in some lakes that are deeper than that.
Yeah.
But most of the lakes that are, in cottage country, the loon can easily hit the bottom anywhere.
Yeah.
No problem.
That's crazy.
And another reason that they can dive so deep, and this is funny, or not funny, it's very interesting. They can actually, as they're diving, expel air from their lungs and basically press their feathers together to expel every bubble of water to make them be able to be less buoyant.
Yeah.
So they can dive super deep.
Wow.
So loons truly, like, obviously they're on the loonie in Canada. And the reason, again, that, we love loons so much is because I think we can relate to the loon, as weird as that sounds.
It's so nostalgic, too.
Yeah. Like whenever I see an osprey when I'm fishing in the Kawarthas, I always hold my two fingers up. I'm like, twins. Like, we're doing the same thing out there. We're both trying to catch fish. And oftentimes that loon, he's catching fish and I'm just watching him catch fish.
Yeah.
But same with loons. Whenever I'm fishing and I see a loon, I love it so much.
Yeah,
It's like, okay,
100%.
buddy, there's my loon friends over there.
Yep.
And the other thing that I relate to with loons is loons are very antisocial. You notice that generally speaking, you only see one or two of them in one area of the lake.
Yeah.
I've seen sometimes a few of them together, like actually more than 10 at one point. But generally speaking, there's usually one or two loons and that's it in one area of the lake. Mm-hmm. But loons are our friends. Make sure that if you see one diving, don't cast towards it because you do not want to hook a loon because that thing will dive 200 feet down, pull all your line off, and give you a heck of a fight. But anyway, I thought that was cool because like loons are one of my favorite animals. And they're beautiful.
I never knew any of that about a loon.
Tell me your loon story quick.
So the loon, I was out fishing on Sunday and I was fishing with a friend and
not me.
I look over. Yeah, no, you're fishing somewhere else.
It's weird. Me and Andrew not fishing together. I'm just fishing. Just have a slow teardrop coming down my cheek.
So I was casting with my new another shout out. I gotta shout out this guy. It's the Hashimoto Concepts. It was the mag blade. I was casting that out. First time actually throwing it on the water. And
how was it?
I loved it. I love that bait. I got a nice largemouth out of it too.
Sweet.
But so there's a loon like coming around and it's been around the area. It's staying to his area, but I'm fishing the shoreline, fishing these rock piles coming up. And all of a sudden I look like beside the boat and this loon's like swimming around. Like I love seeing them swim. Like they're crazy fast, like you said, and it looks so bizarre.
And they use their wings.
They use their wings. They look like they turn into like penguins underwater. Like we've all seen the videos of penguins in the ocean. Like they're insane. They're flying underwater. So is the loon. Like their legs are going mad and their wings are like kicking back. But because they're like checkered white and black, all you see is this weird like blob in the water just like rocketing around moving. Like you can't really tell what it is.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I'm retrieving my mag blade and I thought it was like this big, there are muskie in the lake. So I thought this is like a huge muskie following this thing. I was like the head of a muskie with his like mouth slightly open because all I'm seeing is like band of like white like stuff coming towards it. I was like, oh crap. I'm like freaking out.
He starts figure eighting.
And then I see this, and then I see the beak. And I was like, oh, this is a loon. And I start ripping it in because this loon's going after the mag blade. And I was like, this is a fishy lure then. Hunter, if it can fool a loon, then I have ultimate confidence in this bait. So yeah, that was the first time I've ever had a loon though come after like an artificial bait.
That's crazy. And again, seeing them swim underwater.
Oh, it was scary. I'm like, like he goes, they're way bigger than you think too.
Oh, they are.
Like,
and apparently they're dense like bread.
Well, I believe it. They have solid bones.
So thinking of all these things about loons, was it designed? Loons are so cool. Like, I wish I was a loon, honestly.
Oh, but you are.
Oh, I am. Just a little bit. You know what? I knew Andrew was going to make that joke, and it literally took him like 6 minutes. So congratulations.
Thank you.
This next clip was from an episode we published on July 2nd, episode 18, which was called Is Slinging Stickbait Stupid? Which is really a bit of a tongue twister. I dare you to try to say that 5 times fast. In this episode, which we really enjoyed doing, we talked all about fishing stick baits or Sanko style baits, different sizes, what gear you need, and where to fish them. I think it was a fantastic episode. It got a lot of really positive messages about it, so definitely check that one out if you haven't listened to it. But the interesting fishing fact in this episode was actually Andrew talking about if fish pee. Now, a little bit of a backstory on this. Andrew, even since a young age, has been fascinated with animals, crap, and pee. That sounds a bit weird, but even when I remember going camping with him and his family one time, and we stopped at the Algonquin Park store, and he was like probably 14 years old, and the first book he picked up was Animal Scat, How to Identify Animal Scat. And I looked at him and I was like, why do you want that? And he's just fascinated about that kind of thing. So as weird as that is, this interesting fishing fact was right up his alley. So definitely listen to this and enjoy.
Do fish poop and pee? What do you think?
Yes.
That's accurate. I mean, they're an animal. You'd expect so.
Yep.
Now, some people poop. Yeah. I mean, if you've seen the video, I know Battle has just posted another one, but I was filleting a walleye, and you go to jab the knife in, put pressure on the belly, and just like get fired at with some excrement, and it's not very fun.
That's why I let Andrew flay my fish.
So we know that fish poop. That's pretty much a given. But do fish pee? And this is a pretty popular question, because when I Googled do fish and it came up pee, I was like, okay, this is what the people want.
Okay.
So there's two different main characteristics of fish: there's saltwater fish and freshwater fish. So all fish have a cloaca, which is an anal vent. Essentially, it's their butthole. So
Go on.
We don't have a cloaca, but our fish that we eat sure do. Jesse's so concerned about this topic right now.
I was like, am I going to have to cut this whole thing?
So when saltwater fish urinate, they actually do so. Primarily, most species in saltwater urinate through their gills.
Interesting.
Freshwater fish urinate through their cloaca, same place where the poop comes out of.
Okay.
Now, the reason why fish have to urinate is because they're constantly intake water. Either saltwater fish are drinking water constantly, and freshwater fish will intake water when they feed. And the big difference between the two sections of fish are saltwater fish are trying to drink water, freshwater fish are trying real hard not to. So saltwater fish rarely urinate because they need to balance the salinity in their body with the water around. They have to keep that balance so they don't die. Since they're in salt water, they don't have to. They're intaking all this water to try and get as much fresh water or unsalted water into their body as much as possible. When they do urinate through the gills, it's expelling the excess salt essentially out of their gills. Freshwater fish are trying to retain salt. So they are drinking, they don't want to intake fresh water at all because it will dilute the salt within their body. So they are actually urinating pretty much constantly. So when a freshwater fish, when they feed, they have an intake of water, even just breathing, their gills, because it's how they get their oxygen from the water, it's constantly allowing water, even through their skin, to enter into their body and reduce that salinity. So what they're doing is they're constantly urinating out fresh water, holding on to the salt that they have in their body.
Interesting.
So I can guarantee you that if you've handled a freshwater fish, you've been peed on. Now, another little interesting fun fact with this is if you peed like a bass, how much urine in liters a day do you think you would pee?
Oh, man.
The average of humans right now is like 1.8 liters, 2 liters, like tops. Like that's a lot.
Okay.
That's if you're drinking your 8 cups of water or whatever that they...
I'm going to say like 15 liters.
28 liters.
Oh, God.
So if you peed like a bass, you'd be waking up in a puddle every single morning.
Dude, if I peed like a bass, my house would be flooded.
Now, when it comes to the excrement, the fecal matter, the fish will only poop as much as they can eat. So the more they eat, the more they're going to excrete fecal matter.
I hope no one's literally listening to this in the morning when they're eating breakfast.
How are those Cheerios tasting right now? So that's some interesting fishing facts about fish's urination or fish's excretions.
An interesting fishing fact that you probably never wanted to know, but now you know. So next time you hold a fish, it's probably peeing on you. Also, remember that next time you go to the lake and decide to take a drink of the water.
That's another thing I was going to mention too, because everyone's like, oh, it's gross to pee in the water. Like literally, if you're swimming in fresh water, pretty much everything in that water is peeing around you constantly. Have fun at the cottage this year, kids.
Make sure that when you're hot to dive into that icy cold lake full of pee. That was interesting. Now I have to give Andrew a rating, and I'm going to give him a rating on the number scale this time. And I'm going to give him the interesting rating of 83.
Not bad
83.
for a poop topic.
Not bad. I was going to give him like 63, but we'll give him an 83.
I did research for that fact, man.
It took real balls to come up here in front of all these people and talk about fish poop.
Well, another thing too, the reason why freshwater fish have to urinate constantly, they don't even have bladders.
True.
So they have nowhere to store it. So that's why it's
Imagine if humans didn't have bladders and you just throughout the day you're just literally leaking.
What do you mean imagine? I have to go every 5 minutes.
All right, I'm pretty sure that's enough about poop and pee for this episode. We'd like to thank Andrew again for that. This next episode came out July 16th, 2023. It was episode 20, and it was entitled Wait 2 Seconds, Frog Fishing Frustration. Me and Andrew went into the ins and outs of fishing hollow body frogs for largemouth bass and shallow cover, and also some tips and techniques to help you be a little more effective in doing so. The interesting thing about this episode was my second interesting fishing fact about loons, which was Loon Facts, Part 2. Enjoy. The first fact, remember how last time we said loons basically can't walk on land? They suck at it.
Yes.
They're clumsy, but they're designed literally to be amazing swimmers. And we were both like, I've never seen a loon on land.
Yeah.
I never have. I've never seen one on land. You always see them in the water, but
I've seen them on land sitting on like a nest that's like beside water, and they just like push themselves into water. That's the most land activity I've ever seen a loon have.
Have you ever seen have you ever seen a loon fly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
have you ever seen a loon take off?
They like run on the water?
Yeah. So this is the fact.
Cool.
Okay. We compared loons to being like submarines last time. But loons are actually like airplanes too. So because they're so heavy, they're chunky, they're thick.
Hold on. Did you know that birds are like airplanes? This is your fact?
Yes. They need a runway of water to take off. Okay.
So they can't take off on land then?
No.
That's awesome.
I assume they can't. So they will flop their wings frantically and run across the water's surface for around 90 feet in order to gain enough speed for liftoff.
Wow.
So it's oftentimes like I think of birds that do that like swans.
Yeah,
you
like
see
the
swans
big
just
birds.
like running across the water, flapping their wings furiously. But loons do the same thing because literally they're so heavy that they can't literally just take off. They have to run along the surface, flapping their wings just to take off. Imagine for a second you're fishing in a kayak or canoe. And all of a sudden, this loon is just beelining it right towards your boat. It's like, with its red eyes looking at you. Oh, that'd be scary. So I don't know if I've ever seen a loon take off, but if I did, that'd be pretty cool to see. Now, once they're flying, they're slow to take off, right? It takes them a while to actually get in the air. But once they're flying, what would you say that their max speed of flying is? Just guess. It's way higher than you think.
60 kilometers an hour.
Double.
What?
120 kilometers an hour. I was like, what?
Wow.
That's literally like the average speed of a car on the 401.
Like, ducks, I think, max out at 60 or 70. Like, I did not expect that from a loon.
They're like little red-eyed missiles. So I thought that was insane. Like 120K.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. And the cool thing is you may think, oh, they're heavy. They can't fly very far. Wrong. They can fly really far. In fact, there was a U.S. Geological Survey. They tracked a loon with GPS that flew over 1,000 kilometers in 24 hours. Now, to put that in perspective, that's if you were a loon and you took off flapping furiously across the water in Toronto, you would land. I'm not saying they didn't land throughout the day, but that's from flying from Toronto all the way to Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Wow.
In one day.
It takes over half a day to drive that. Like,
yeah. Now, like, that gave me a whole new respect for loons. Like, literally, that's a long distance to fly. I'm like, an albatross could handle that. No, loon's like, no problem, man. I'm on the dollar for a reason. They know how to stretch a buck. Okay, here's another one that really just blew my mind. Did you know that loons eat rocks?
Now, I didn't know loons did, but I know that like bears and stuff will eat rocks to help with digestion.
Exactly. And it's probably for the same reason. So loons don't have teeth.
Yeah.
Right? So they cannot chew their food. Obviously, you don't see them chewing on a perch or whatever. So they swallow fish whole.
It'd be terrifying if birds chewed food.
Oh, especially seagulls just watching you, just chewing. So anyway, loons, they swallow fish whole. Obviously, they don't chew. They don't use fork and knife. Like, come on.
How barbaric.
Exactly. So when you consume food whole, it obviously makes digestion difficult. Mm-hmm. And that's why we chew our food. We're not going to like eat full hot dogs and stuff. Like there are some freaks out there that do that, but not recommended. You probably have terrible problems in the bathroom. So because of that, loons are smart. They're like, you know what? I don't want bathroom problems. So what they do is they swallow small rocks and it grinds the food in their stomach and helps with digestion.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah.
You have to think like, how does the bird know to do that? It's just like, oh man, I got some crapping problems. Just like, well, we'll just eat some rocks, no problem.
Yeah, it's like, how can I fix this? By eating something solid I can't pass naturally?
Yeah.
Like, wow, that seems like a genius idea.
And the last fact, which is very cool, and I did not know this at all, is loons, their eye color is red. Like whenever we see them, it's red.
Yeah.
But their eyes actually change color throughout the year.
Really?
Loons have what they say, beautiful crimson red eyes. I call them creepy serial killer eyes. But that's only during the spring and the summer, during mating season. During the winter, a loon's eyes change to a dark gray color. Now, scientists, again, I love when scientists are like, we don't know. They don't know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Scientists do not know why their eyes turn red, but some think it helps with underwater vision or to attract mates. So this next clip was from episode 28, which was released September 10th, 2023. It was entitled 4 Hammocks and a Cricket, Backcountry Camping and Fishing. Now this is actually one of me and Andrew's favorite episodes because what we did is we packed all of our podcast equipment, our laptops, our mics, our stands, our lights and everything, and we drove 6 hours north and went backcountry camping. Sounds a bit crazy, totally was, probably won't do it again, but the episode was absolutely fantastic because we had our camping buddy Royce there. Now Royce is an absolutely fantastic camper. He puts me and Andrew to shame, and he makes some of the best camp food that we've ever had. So definitely check out this episode if you haven't already. It was a fantastic one. We really enjoyed it. Listen to this clip.
We went camping for the first time with Royce last year, and Jesse and I are like so jealous of every single meal this guy's bringing out of his bag. And he's like, oh yeah, tonight I'm going to have ribs. We're like, how are you going to cook ribs over fire? That's going to take forever. It's going to be a pain in the butt. He pulls out this pre-smoked full rack of ribs, barbecue sauce all up. How did you, like, you just heated it up on top of the grill in tinfoil or something, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So it's all about prep, right? It's all about prepping ahead of time. And that's the part I like too, right? You think about it a little bit ahead and you get some food ready and you just pre-cook. Yeah. You know, I try to do it the week before and then I'll vacuum seal it, throw it in the freezer, then it's ready to go. Or I'll wrap it in some foil, whatever it takes. But man, I like to keep stuff clean too. That's important, right? Backcountry is all about the bears, keeping the critters out of it. The mice are, they're always out there. Just take some time ahead and think about it and put the time in, the effort in. You guys put your effort into getting your gear ready. You got your fishing rods ready. You had to get a boat ready. I have a canoe. Canoe goes on the roof. Paddles go in the back. I'm done. And then throw my stuff in. I've been canoeing since I was a kid. One of my first memories of camping is with my parents. And I was in a canoe with them, going to some little cabin in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in early years in Timmins, so way up north. That's what I remember. So that's what I like. But I love to eat. Right, food's important. So yeah, get out ribs, and then I also happen to have a couple of pounds of brisket, all vacuum sealed and ready to go. And I brought my son. Don't forget, now he's 20. He also loves to eat.
Yes.
So we took our time and we had some stuff ready to go, and that was good. But
Jesse and I, we started planning this trip on last year's camping trip. He's like, hey, I know this lake I want to go to, this back lake. It's amazing. We're gonna call it Brisket and that was the big thing, is we can't wait. Like next year, Jesse and I were going to split a brisket with Royce. He does all the work and smokes it, vacuum seals it, sous vide it, sous vide.
No sous. When I get up here?
Once it's here, it's already smoked
just
and
boil
cooked.
and bag basically. Yeah.
And like you get the brisket for us, and then we will go fishing. Sounds like a great deal.
Sounds like a great time to me.
This next clip came from episode 31, which came out October 1st, 2023. This episode was called The Jig is Up and Down and Up. It was an episode that Andrew hosted all about jig fishing, especially in the fall. He covered all types of jigs for all types of species. It was an amazing episode. In this episode, my interesting fishing fact, you guessed it, Loon Facts Part 3. It's interesting. The Chippewa believed that the loon's haunting cry was an omen of death.
It is for fish.
Yeah, and in some native legends, the loon is a bird of magical powers. In others, it's a messenger or a symbol of power. So I thought we could just go into some of the lore that, the loon has. The early European settlers had their own reactions when they first heard the eerie call of the loon. Now you have to think, there's not loons in Europe, I assume. Maybe there are, but not the specific kind that we have here. So when they first heard this call, the reactions were interesting. So a guy named Henry David Thoreau describes the sound of the loon. This was like an old school guy back hundreds of years ago. So he said, it's the wildest sound, like demonic laughter, something like a waterfowl. So it's not a duck. It's slightly scarier.
Yes.
So that's what one guy said, one of the early European settlers. Now, the ancient Inuit of Alaska, they have actually elaborate burials for loons because they're very significant birds. And what they do is they adorn the skulls with ivory eyes. Loons are very important to a lot of different cultures. And I'm probably going to, not say this name properly, but one tribe, the Tsimshian tribe, they have a legend that loons have the ability to give sight to those who are blind by taking them to the bottom of the lake until their vision is restored. It is said that the white banding around the neck of the loon from the feathers is a white necklace of shells that was a gift of gratitude from someone whose eyesight returned. Now, these diving birds were rewarded for being able to dive, which is interesting. Now, these tribes had theories as to why loons were water birds. And I thought I could just read one of them. And I'm not going to put this in my own words. I'm going to read this verbatim because it's very interesting. So it says, in her book, The Common Loon, Spirit of Northern Lakes, Judith McIntyre summarizes a legend that tells why. The legend tells about an earlier time when loons lived on land. The loon was so tame yet clumsy that it annoyed all the villagers as it ran in and out of the wigwams, knocking over belongings and spilling food and drink. The Micmacs could finally stand it no longer. They caught Loon and threatened to throw him into the water. Thinking quickly, Loon begged them not to throw him in the water, but to throw him in the fire instead. Smart. Thinking they could finally get even, were sure to throw him into the water. When he was safely away from the village, he called back to them with his wonderful laugh, saying, just what I wanted, just what I wanted. So that's what they're saying when they're going, woo, just what I wanted. And that is how the loon became a water bird. This next clip is actually one of my personal favorites. This came from the May 7th episode, which was episode 10, called Carp Fishing Basics. We actually had a local guest who is a local carp guru, which is commonly Carpy on Instagram. We talked about a lot of different techniques for catching carp in Ontario, but the interesting fishing fact in this episode was all about squirrels. Enjoy this one. All right, Andrew, I have a question for you for my interesting fishing fact. 85 years ago, a French engineer named André created what iconic and best-selling lure?
The MEPS.
Correct. The MEPS aglia, which actually means in Latin, interestingly enough, butterfly. But when that thing spins, it looks kind of like a weird sinking, swimming through the water butterfly, I guess. That's why they named it that. And it is, apparently, they say, the world's best-selling lure.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I
for
know
sure.
I own more than a few of them.
Oh, for sure. And they catch fish. Now, these lures became so popular that by 1960, they had already sold 500,000. So that was 85 years ago. They started it. And then by 1960, they already sold 500,000 in the USA alone. That's it.
Wow.
Now, they started making MEPS in a small back room. Now, if you're a guy starting a business or a girl starting a business, you can start in a small back room, no problem. Just like this podcast is in a small back room right now. But later, they expanded to a 50,000 square foot factory. So
you have to improve a little bit.
That's our next podcast space.
Yeah.
We're just like running around
50,000 square feet. Now, the cool thing is they have dozens of blade colors, tail colors, and sizes. So with all those combinations together, MEPS actually makes over 4,000 different combinations of their spinners, which is pretty cool. I know probably Andrew has probably about half of those.
Maybe.
Now, I thought that an interesting part would just be something more funny. It's not really, something that you'd be like interesting, but this is a funny part. So we all know that MEPS makes, tons of spinners, but they have the dress tail spinners. And I'm sure we all have one. It's squirrel hair.
Black Fury is like, yeah.
Yeah, a classic, right?
Yeah.
So they have the dressed squirrel tail feathered hooks. Or they may have some feathers in there too. And they're so popular that MEPS is always looking for squirrel tails. That sounds weird, okay? They always want squirrel tails. And in fact, there was a huge wooden sign at the factory in Wisconsin, and it literally was this huge sign outside the factory, and it says in letters, "Home of MEPS." And then underneath in huge block letters, literally the size of like a human being, it says, "Squirrel tails wanted."
I want that. Like,
Yeah.
I get a cottage up there. I'm just going to throw that in the front door. Be like, welcome to Andrew's cottage. Squirrel tails wanted.
And apparently they said that they do like factory tours at MEPS, and they say that they get a lot of random people that just, they don't know what the heck is going on. They don't know what MEPS is, but they come to the factory for the tour because they're wondering what squirrel tail, like what are you going to do with squirrel tails? Because,
Chicken nuggets.
ugh. So they actually have a program for hunters to send in their squirrel tails because they tie so many of them. Again, they tie like thousands and thousands a day probably. What would you say is the price of an average squirrel tail? So like say you acquired a squirrel tail, how much do you think it would go for? It's not as much as you think.
25 cents.
25 cents, that's correct. 25 cents for a fully usable squirrel tail. And it's 12.5 cents if it's subpar, which is pretty funny. Like I didn't know how much a squirrel tail is going to cost.
Now, I kind of estimated, like full honesty here. I have heard about the squirrel tails before, and I
Okay.
was looking online, and there's actually price tiers.
Yes,
And I don't know if you're going into that, but
a little bit, yeah.
it's like, oh, here's like you get so many cents for one squirrel tail, or if you bring 100, it's more. Like,
Yeah.
who's collecting 100 squirrel tails and having them not like rot away before they bring them into the factory?
Exactly. And I was actually have a little bit of the process here. I'm not going to go fully into it, but their squirrel tail program, it shows how to submit your tails, which is, it's funny. Like, we don't live like, down in the wilderness where, maybe shooting squirrels for food is like a thing. Like for us, we think,
I've
eating.
had squirrel. It was good.
Okay, so there. So like for me, like I think eating squirrel is kind of hillbilly-ish. If you're
It
offended by
is.
the term hillbilly, please unsubscribe.
I guarantee you, anyone who's eaten squirrel is not offended by the term hillbilly. They're like, that's a badge of honor.
Exactly. So what do you do when you get a squirrel tail, however you acquire it? Also, just to note, MEPS literally says on their website they do not encourage you to kill squirrels just for their tail. These are for squirrels that are being harvested for food.
Yeah.
And then the tail obviously is used as well.
One of the things too, which I know because I saw it in a TV show a while ago, just as a little side note, syrup area, like maple syrup farms,
Yeah.
they have an issue with the squirrels chewing through the sap lines. So they have to get rid of the squirrels because we all love our maple syrup here in Canada. So we want to keep that going. So we got to stop those squirrels from chewing on it. So that is another reason why they're also harvested.
Interesting. So yeah, no offense to squirrels, but these spinners are good. So what can I say? So this is a little bit about the process I find interesting. So they recommend on their website, when you get a squirrel, however you acquire this squirrel,
Roadkill.
do not remove the tailbone. So just straight tail, It says salt the butt end generously. Okay? Now if you've gotten that
sounds
far,
delicious.
make sure the tail is straight because a bent tail cannot be used. So don't send MEPS no bent up janky squirrel tails.
The tail's got rigor mortis in the ball.
Yeah. And they tell you the best tails are taken after October 1st. I guess it would be like, the
They're-
bushy winter tail.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
what they want. And it's funny to look on the website. It actually has pictures and shows you how long the fur has to be and all this stuff. And the funny thing is you can actually choose, so they'll pay you, but you can also choose payment of trade for lures. So they'll actually give you a credit towards lures, and then you ship them the tails. They ship you some spinners with the squirrel tails on them. So you can literally just recycle the squirrel tail again and again and again.
Over the last 9 months, every single weekend, we have done our best to post content that is not only enjoyable, but also educational. So we had no idea what to expect when we started this podcast originally. And we kept our expectations low, but we were blown away by the support of the fishing community that we got. It blows our mind that every episode gets hundreds, if not thousands of downloads. It's crazy. Me and Andrew would like to thank you for listening to our Average podcast and supporting us grow into one of Ontario's top fishing podcasts. Special thanks to our Patreon members who help us cover some of the costs incurred on this weekly podcast. Season 2 starts in January, so me and Andrew will have December off to prepare. Please note that Patreon payments will be paused for the month of December. Now we're really looking forward to Season 2. We have big things in the works. We appreciate you all. From Andrew and myself, we wish you all the best. We will be back in January, better than ever. Tight lines.